So just wanted to go over something in brief. What do you think it is about? Naturally, people have this skepticism, and again, on cryptohashreview.com, you word it nicely where you say righteous anxiety, right? And do you think it's a similar thing to whenever there's something new? So I've heard people talk about how when radio first came out, the scholars said that it was, some scholars said, correct me if I'm wrong, that is haram or whatever. And then hundreds of years ago, the printing press, a similar thing happened, which disadvantaged the Muslims if you think about it. So do you think it's that kind of skepticism of what's new, which in a sense can be necessary as well? Um, with Bitcoin, I think it's like the default kind of thinking is that, oh, this sounds a bit like, is this even halal? You know what I mean? Can you just talk about
Yes.
that?
So it's kind of it's ironic, really, because a lot of the objections towards Bitcoin are valid. I would probably say all of them are valid and correct. If their assumptions were for who's made this Bitcoin, except that Bitcoin is a trustless system and it's open source. So yeah, and any other system, like if I made like a currency with a database on my personal computer, then yeah, I mean, who are you? You can just switch off your computer and run after the money. I get that. But if you have a distributed ledger across the whole globe, running on software that is open source, so you can look at the code and analyze it for yourself, then you've removed that as a factor. But that's the point. Most people don't go beyond just the basic surface understanding of Bitcoin. They think, oh, what it is, they assume that Bitcoin is like the old system we had before. That's basically what it is. So Bitcoin is just another version of what we already have. And we know how what we have, the ruling of that. So basically it's like that. Or for example, one of the issues, one of the objections that they have, other than I know it's a classic one. Can't think of one of
The main one
the better example.
is like, oh, we can't hold. It's a silly one if you go even one level deep, but it's like we can't hold it.
Yes, tangible.
Yeah,
That's it. Tangibility. Yeah. So that is a big one. That is a big one, and that's a legacy. That's a legacy effect. It's a legacy effect. It's like Did you know that when they first made cars, they used to be able to direct the cars with reins? As in, you turn the car left with a rope and turn the car right with this rope. But why did they do that? Because they had horses. So it's called skeuomorphism. Skeuomorphism basically means where you integrate legacy systems into new systems, because that's what people are used to. To go to a completely different system is so drastic as a change, people won't be able to keep up. And that's kind of what Apple did. When Apple first made the iPhone, a lot of the icons were essentially icons of real life, real world things. Like the notepad was a picture of a notepad, the phone was a picture of a phone. Or I mean, everything was a picture of what it was in the real world. And that was fine. Communicate to people what this app does by giving you an image of what it does in the real world. Yeah. Until they change their design to a non-skeuomorphic design, and then everyone now gets the gist. So even in telecommunications, even it's just another one of the most amazing things about the human brain. So we had normal analog phones, yeah. So through normal wire, analog. So obviously with analog phones, there's like a constant hiss because you have to compress the sound waves to a bandwidth that the lines could hold. Yeah. So so you get that kind of background noise that you can always hear that someone's there. So when they changed their phone lines to digital, essentially they removed the hiss because they're able to compress the data into bytes, zeros, and ones. And then you remove the hiss.
Yeah.
And what happened? The other guy hung up because when they stopped talking, it was dead silent.
Yeah.
So they actually artificially put back in a hiss, just to let people know that someone's still on the phone. So imagine that they actually had to downgrade the quality of the sound just to make you realize that the phone call is still happening. So they're still using they're still kind of reflecting the old way of looking at it, although the technology has moved forward. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So same thing with Bitcoin and the issue of tangibility. In all the books of fiqh, Islamic rulings, there's a heavy dependency and emphasis on the physical. So, for example, if let's look at this, like this thing here. If I have this in my hand, then and you say it's yours, me as a judge, he's got it in his hand, evidence of yours. So physical possession is very important, because that's how throughout history and still to this day you kind of define ownership. It's in my hand. Same thing with transaction. If I was to give you gold and you give me gold, or I'll give you gold and you give me silver, how do I know that there's finality in that transaction? It's in my hand. That's how I define finality. So how do you understand finality in a Bitcoin transaction? What does that what does that look like?
The ledger.
You say the ledger, but I mean, to someone who has no idea what the ledger is, what does that mean to me? I mean, if we can't touch it, then it's not real, isn't it? I mean, and this is where we have to really now, as Muslims and as human beings even, really start reassessing what it means to own something, and what is even something, because we now live in a digital age, which is basically the information age, where things are owned and it's pure information. In the past, if you owned something, it was purely physical. I couldn't really own a poem. How do I own a poem in the past? You wrote a poem.
Yeah.
How do you own it, and how do you stop me from memorizing it and then reciting it? There's no way of doing that.
It's just reputation based, I guess.
Reputation based. Whereas today, I can actually send you something, and it's now on your computer. And now with blockchain, which is the first time in human history, one of the biggest innovations that blockchain brought to us, and what Bitcoin brought to us, was that for the first time in human history, we were able to have ownership of knowledge. I could prove that I own something that is not really physical, that is not really there. And that's essentially what it is. So that's going to be a very difficult transition for people. But I don't think it's difficult conceptually, but it's difficult for those who are not interested in learning. I think that's generally what it is. If you go on my Twitter, you see many people trolling, saying Bitcoin's rubbish, willing to even bother looking at it. I'm saying, look, what you're saying is not true. If you want to go and look, I can't be bothered. No one's interested. So if you add that factor, people are not interested anyway. They're happy where they are. And the fact that it's difficult to learn, it's going to take a very long time before the general people, including the ulama, to actually take the time to learn it.